to you, you know it's in their head and they can't get it out. They just can't, yeah? So if you have a student who communicates with you like that, they may have rapid automatic naming disorder. And what often this develops is to learned helplessness or some of those other behaviours we saw. Because students with learning disorders are average or above average IQ. 40% of them are gifted. So we're not talking about people's disabilities. We're not talking about intellectual disability. We're talking about bright, smart people. Now, it can impact people's disabilities as well, but the range of people we're talking about are clever, smart people. So what do you do if you've gone through primary school and high school and no one's ever identified you have this learning disorder and you're smart and you're clever? What do you become?
Disenchanted.
Disengaged?
Clown.
A clown? Disruptive?
Quiet.
Or quiet. Or you just disappear. So the reason it's dyslexia is the garden. Well, you will diagnose yourself, and you'll diagnose your children today, and your family, or your partner, or yourself. Okay. So dyslexia is like the garden variety description. Dyslexia. Okay. But you can see from this that there's a lot more to it. So that's why the correct term is SLD or LD, specific learning disorders. So dyslexia makes up about 10 to 20% of the population. It's the most common SLD, and you've just experienced a little bit of rapid automatic naming, or RAN, it's called for short. There's some people have a visual processing disorder, which means there's nothing wrong with their eyesight, but when they see things and they've got to process it, they get really challenged about how to process what they see visually. And we'll unpack. Look, I normally do a day on this, but it was something people said was really important, so I'm just cramming it in to give you a bit of information. Some people have an auditory processing disorder, which means they can hear perfectly well, but they can't discern where sounds are coming from, and they have trouble concentrating, they have trouble listening, they have trouble following instructions. A phonological processing disorder is sort of connected to auditory, but it's when you can't hear the difference between a B and a D. And you can't hear the difference between a 5 and an F. So, or you can't read the difference. So that's sort of most common. Dysgraphia is those students have really, really poor handwriting. So it's a fine motor skill deficit. Dyscalculia, if you're an English teacher, you probably have this. I've never met an English teacher who doesn't have dyscalculia. And 50% of dyslexics have it. Dyspraxia is and it can affect speech. You've got students who stutter, and they just can't. It's a different to RAN. That's a retrieval thing. Can be that your students who can't pack up their gear. You know, they leave a mess, they take ages to put things, they bump into furniture, they're always clumsy, they're knocking over things all the time. And executive function disorder, a very, very fancy name for students who've been called lazy. It means you cannot organise yourself out of a brown paper bag. They've been in trouble all of their life, their locker's a mess, their desk is a mess, their bedroom is a mess, so you all diagnose yourself now, right? You're born needing a PA. Executive function disorder, often very highly capable people, complete chaos. And they're always in trouble for forgetting their homework, losing pens, losing phones, losing everything. So students with ADHD, 40 to 60% of students with ADHD are dyslexic. And students on the spectrum, autistic, ASD, whatever you like to describe it as, they have very high percentages of dyspraxia, that motor organisation. We know one, I sort of co-present this with a friend who got diagnosed at 47. She only got diagnosed when she took her son to see an educational psychologist because he was already like her in grade 2 saying, crying, I don't want to go to school, I don't want to go to school. And when they did the test, she thought, isn't everybody like this? Because people assume, they just keep quiet about it. So, we're going to have a quick snapshot of what this looks like and how it impacts engagement on learners. So the best definition we can find is this one. It's a neurological disorder that affects the brain's ability to receive, to process, to store, and then to respond to information. So if you keep thinking about that, it's about how they receive visual information, they process it, they store it, then they respond to it. So probably like an analogy for it is this. I just live near Box Hill. So I get on a Box Hill. If I want to catch the train in town, I just go, if the train's behaving themselves, I'm in town in 15, 20 minutes. All right? But a student with a learning disorder will get to Camberwell and go, I'm getting off at Camberwell because I want to go to Kew because I want to go visit the little gallery there. And I get to Kew and then go, I can go, why don't we go to Richmond and have some pho? So go to Richmond and have some pho at the fantastic Vietnamese restaurants. Go from there and then go, I think we're meant to be in town. How are we going to get to town? Got to go, go via East Melbourne, or maybe you have to walk. And then eventually get there. So the processes are different, but the outcomes can be the same. But what do you notice about this? If I can go like that, someone else is going to go like that. What are the things you might expect? Pardon?
It takes longer.
It takes longer. That's a key thing. Everything takes longer. So you need to accommodate to give more time. It's a lot more colourful.
It's the scenic route.
It's the scenic route. And so people with learning disorders are really good at thinking laterally and thinking divergently. They can think outside the square. And you find a lot of people who work in trades are like that. They're just brilliant at thinking laterally, thinking outside the square. Okay? So, but there's challenges when they get into a classroom. That's where we see the disengagement. So there is no one stereotypical dyslexic person, and you cannot cure it. It's the way your brain is wired. But I want to just share with you some strategies today, very simple things you can do to make an immediate difference for students. But this is a quote from a TAFE student. Every time I see a writing assignment, I get sick to my stomach, like I want to throw up, because I know it's going to take me 3 times longer than everybody else. And so their response can either be apathy or anxiety or just screwing it up and walking out the door. So, do a lot of you use PowerPoints and handouts? Yeah? Okay. This is something I really learned from this, is when you use lots of colours or fancy fonts, or change from capitals to italics because you want your PowerPoint to look good, or you use animations, or you underline things, or use lots of pictures to make it look good, it can be very confusing and hard to read. Yeah. So these are all challenges that there are for students who already have a visual processing disorder. They're already having trouble tracking. So there's a few things that I'd like to sort of show you that you can do immediately. For example, there are some fonts that actually really help students. You can change the font. So for example, so you can determine if they can't determine the difference between A, B's, C's and D's, but when they're Arial and Calibri, I never know how to say it. But again, it's all individual. But like there's now a dyslexic friendly font, and my friend who's very dyslexic says she can't read it. She can't read it. So it's a matter of just experimenting and just trialing. Another thing also is I found with these blokes that I taught years ago, and I was just making it up as I went. One day, for some reason, I just decided to change the background colour, of the paper, and one of them said, I can read it now. Have you found that with any students? Yeah. And it's usually that it's those yucky colours, the buff yellow, buff pink, buff blue. It's softer on the eye. You can change the background of your PowerPoint just to a soft blue. The way you use paper, I know that we're all meant to save paper and photocopy both sides, but if someone's got a visual processing disorder, can you see through there? For some people that's a problem. So, and it's not necessarily, all of these ideas aren't necessarily a matter of I'm just going to do it for you because you're dyslexic. It's actually good teaching practice using these same fonts. And you know, if you just do it for everybody, you don't have to isolate anyone, but you can sort of check in with them. Another thing is to have all of your work flush left and rag right. So basically, you know, sometimes you put it in the centre and it goes like that, but just have everything down one side. Dot points are really good because it's easier to track it. If you can't change the background colour, you can actually buy these colour overlays. That's the website from them, where you can, students can, if they've got a textbook, because of course you can't change the colour of the textbook, they just put an overlay on the top. Have you ever seen people with those coloured glasses on?
Rose-coloured glasses.
Yeah, Erlen glasses, they're called. Yeah, the research is out on that. For some people they were alright, but they're very expensive and they tend to make you look dorky. So they're usually alright for a while, but so because now there's a requirement for teachers to know about this, all of a sudden there's lots of people who are going to cure dyslexia and it usually costs you $4,000. So buyer beware. Buyer beware. One other thing I'd like to point out is if you have a visual processing disorder, you have a lot of difficulty looking down. Like if you've got to copy something off the board, you've got to look down, you've got to look up. You've got to look down, you've got to look up. A lot of people have visual memory issues or auditory memory issues. So looking down, looking up is really hard. So therefore, if you're going to write across the board, say writing, for a start, I would never talk at the board. No, we do it because we forget. But always think, as soon as you go talk that way. But if I'm writing on the board, and if I take a step, I've gone too far. Because people with visual processing disorder would have difficulty tracking along the distance. So a simple thing you can do straight away is if I'm writing on the board, as soon as I want to take a step, go down, do it in chunks. Right? And then if I want to write more, then I move across and do another column. You might notice some of your students write like that. Some of them really like writing in tables, or they quite like writing in PowerPoint. The other thing is black and blue are good. You can use red occasionally to highlight something. And all those other colours, which are the only ones that work, the orange, the blue, the pink, just chuck them out. Chuck them out. Because people can't read them. They can't read it. So once you become aware of this, it makes a huge difference. So some things we can do for students. See, particularly this is relevant to the classroom and it's relevant if you're training out in the job. Because you have to remember. So a key thing you can do is teach students how to take note-taking skills. Or teach them strategies like how to take notes. Deborah reckons that saved her life, learning how to take notes. You've got phones now, you can do notes on that. You can actually record people and do speech to text or text to speech. Talk at a slower pace. I know I talk too fast a lot of the time. Slow down. Don't hand out papers and give instructions at the same time. Apart from the fact see again, it's just poor teaching practice, but we do it because we're in a hurry. But if you're handing out paper, that's a rustle as well. I'm giving instructions, I'm handing around, and there's rustling paper as well. So give one task at a time. There's this and that. And it's a bit hard with adults and young people to say sit up the front because you don't want to look like a nerd. So what you can do is say, here's instructions, there's this, then that, then this. And have a handout, ideally. But if you've clearly explained it up the front to everyone and making sure they're all focused. So they're just some quick, simple strategies. And I think for me, auditory processing disorder, the visual processing disorder are the really key. And the strategies I've given you there and those ones there are just simple things you can do tomorrow that can make a big difference. So there's still a huge stigma Huge stigma. So I think what I, as an educator, have done is identified, like, watched for the signs, provided alternatives, trying to arrange for accommodations, and just sometimes you see all of a sudden they'll shift. All of a sudden they're learning better, and that's, oh, that's really helpful. I'll just give them a handout and say, does this, I thought I'd try this paper, what do you reckon? So you've got to be respectful. So it's about creating a level playing field, and it's easily done just by changing fonts, doing the same thing for everyone, keeping an eye out for someone who might have a lot of problems.